It is said to be a wall from the second Jerusalem temple. Now, whether that's factual or not, I couldn't say. Um, all right. So, continuing on the theme of birds, not for this lesson, but just for this little. I do. Is it on? I think it's on. Hmm. Uh, so a woman bought a parrot, and she couldn't afford a new parrot, so she got a used parrot. It was only slightly used, but she didn't think to ask who its prior owner had been. And when she got home, she realized it had been a pirate's parrot because it cursed like a sailor, and it had nothing to say that was not obscene. So she took it back to the store. She said, "Hey, this isn't working out." They said, "Sorry, it's used as is, no refunds." She took it to a veterinarian. She said, "What do I do about this?" The veterinarian said, "Well, there's really only one thing you can do in this situation to untrain a parrot, and that is whenever it says something objectionable, just put it in the freezer for a couple of minutes, and it'll eventually figure it out." She said, "No, no, I'm not doing that either." But the weeks went by, and the parrot just kept on cursing like a drunken sailor. And so finally, one day she did. She just got so fed up that she opened the freezer, shoved in the parrot, shut the freezer, waited 2 minutes, let it out. The parrot came out shivering and said, "Shiver me timbers. Okay, I'll be good. I just got to know that turkey in there. What did he say?" All right. Okay. Um, so uh, back in September, I know September's a while ago, we were talking about the Bible and the creation stories in the biblical book of Genesis. And then in October and November, we did just a brief, history of Israel and especially the Israel and Palestine conflict, because I felt like that's something that's really timely right now. Um, we're going to return now to that biblical Eden story. Um, when we looked at the story in which this woman like eats the fruit of the tree and gives it to her husband, and the next thing you know, everybody is cursed. Um, Especially the woman gets cursed in that story. Remember, when Adam first saw Eve in the story, he burst into song and he said, "At last, this is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone." And the Bible says, and therefore, that's why when a man and woman get married, he leaves his family and moves in with her family, which is not a biblical tradition. Because a couple of paragraphs later, after she has eaten this fruit and given it to him, then God curses them and especially curses her. It says, "From now on, your husband is going to rule over you." So it's this really disastrous story. It does seem to retain some recollection of a time when the ancestors of the ancient Hebrews seem to have been um, matrilocal, meaning one of those tribal cultures where husbands move in with their wife, with their wife's family. Um, it retains some traces of some ancient matriarchal culture. If you look very closely at the Adam and Eve story, God creates the woman because the man can't take care of himself, and he needs someone to watch him and take care of him, and apparently also to feed him, because she's the one who, like, picks the fruit. She gives it to him. He doesn't ask any questions. He just says, "Yeah, you're the person who feeds me. You're giving me food. I'm going to eat." So the story, when we look at the story, yes, we know where the story is going. We know that the story is a misogynistic story and that it's going to end with this gender imbalance. It's going to end with this curse. But if we look closely at the story, we can see that there was this other thing, that the story seems to preserve a memory of some earlier, some pre-patriarchal period. Now, when we looked at the story, we were also, I ended that session with this question. Could it be that this story of the woman being cursed and the man being put in control, could that have been propaganda against an older religion? Um, what do we know about the religion of Canaan before the Hebrews arrived? Well, we know that the people that we think of as the Hebrews, the Israelites, they seem to have showed up in Canaan about 1,200 years before the Common Era. And archaeologists then can go digging and they can actually dig underneath that. They can say what was going on there first. And what they find most commonly is representations of goddesses. It seems that the religion of ancient Canaan um, largely circled around goddesses, for example, the goddess Asherah, who is mentioned numerous times in the Bible. They keep saying in the Bible, no matter how many times we tell people to take down their Asherah statues, they keep putting them back up. Um, and here in this ancient engraving, we see the goddess Asherah. She is dancing. She has this dance that brings about the fertility of the land. In her hands, she is holding sheaves of grain, representing the abundance of the land, representing the land's ability to feed the people. And from these sheaves of grain, she is feeding two goats. And so in this representation here, we've got the goddess who is, fertile and productive, both for the shepherds and for the farmers. So like it connects to the major food sources at the time. In this next image, it's a similar image, except that in this, instead of the goddess, there is a tree, and there's this tree that's feeding the goats. And we know that one of the symbols of the goddess Asherah was a decorated tree, that people would gather around a tree and they would decorate it and they would dance around it. Or in some cases, they would cut down the tree and they would like bring it into a temple and they would carve it and they would put like clothing and decorations on it. As a matter of fact, it's not so different from like the custom of the Christmas tree to kind of bring this like sacred thing into your house. In the case of a Christmas tree, an evergreen, something that is remarkably alive even after it has been cut down. So, well, yes, yeah, and the Christmas tree is a tradition that's a lot older than Jesus. Bringing a tree indoors during the season of Yule or like whatever that's called, wherever. In ancient Israel, it would not have been this kind of tree, but just using this as an example of a decorated tree. So the most popular deity in pre-Israelite Canaan was the goddess Asherah. She was known to have a consort, not a husband, but a sort of a male deity companion who was known as Baal, the storm god, the rider of the clouds. Um, he was he was often depicted with bull horns. We can see the bull horns as a sign of kind of like reproductive virility. Um, He was also here. We see him with a staff that is a lightning bolt. He's a storm god, a sky, excuse me, a sky god. Um, uh-huh. Oh yeah, here. Well, here in this depiction, I think he's got a sword. He's got like a sword hanging from his belt. Um, Good. And the belief in pre-Israelite Canaan was that you know Asherah, the goddess, represented the fertility of the land, and then the land needed to be fertilized by the sky. And so when it rained or when there was a thunderstorm, people believed that it was the god Baal up there and that he was sending down this rain to fertilize the earth so that it could grow the plants and the plants could feed the goats. Um, People often, because the relationship of the sky and the ground was um, sort of conceived of as like a sexual reproductive relationship. People often celebrated Baal by erecting these stone pillars, like these just giant phallic symbols sticking up out of the earth, to give a sense of the scale of these things. Here is a pillar of Baal with like tourists standing in front of them. So people would raise up actually these giant phallic symbols. Um, this picture just got into this slideshow somehow. This is not an Israelite thing. This actually, but although this is an Egyptian symbol of the earth god who has this longing for his sister in the sky. All right. So before the Israelites got there, and continuing after the Israelites got there, this is a Lego artist's rendering of what a shrine looked like. Although I got to say the Lego artist does this pretty well because here you've got the pillar of Baal. Here you have a horned altar, and this is mentioned numerous times in the Bible, where you build an altar and it's got bull horns like sticking out of it. Now, this artist gives us a carved statue of the goddess Asherah next to a tree, although really, if they were doing this outside, probably the representation of Asherah would be the living tree. Um, that, yes, yeah, that's that's right. That's a really good, um, yeah, Baal, which some people pronounce Baal and some people pronounce Baal. And I think my Old Testament teacher in seminary said Baal, and there's a Tennyson poem that says Baal, and I just think it's uh, it's true. It's true. He was immensely popular. And it's true. If you're going through the Bible, this is a constant popularity contest. It's a constant struggle between the prophets of the God of Israel and the prophets of Baal. And there are stories in which the prophets get in like prophet contests, like to see whose God can strike something with lightning and set it on fire. There are stories where like they kill all of the prophets of Baal, but apparently they're not gone because a couple of pages later they're still there. What was it about this? What was it about this Baal that people really liked? Um, well, for one thing, um, Baal was sexual. And so, the God of Israel was really kind of squeamish and kind of really anxious. What was a real party pooper? That's a good way to put it. Uh, and the God of Israel was very like anxious about sexuality and like didn't want women in the temple and like was really kind of misogynistic. Um, whereas, you know, Asherah, this fertility goddess who had this like sort of, like boyfriend in the sky, Baal. I mean, that was a real, that was a real, it was a real party. It was a real celebration of just being human, having a good time. The rituals of Asherah and Baal were generally outdoors. And as a matter of fact, when it comes to what was it that made these other gods so popular, um, we actually have um, an eyewitness account of a ritual to these Canaanite gods and goddesses um, in the book of Hosea. So Hosea is a prophet. He says you got to shut all this down. You got to stop doing all this stuff. But he also accidentally describes what's going on at these rituals. He says, wine and new wine take away the understanding. A spirit of whoredom has led the people astray, and they have played the whore, forsaking their God. They sacrifice on the tops of mountains. They make offerings on the hills under oak, poplar, and terebinth because their shade is good. So here he's saying people are making sacrifices, by which he means they're like having a big barbecue, like people who never eat meat. Um, like when they gather for these rituals, that's the one time that they get to like actually kill a goat and everybody gets to eat meat. And it's really exciting. And they've got all of this wine and everybody's getting drunk. Um, and they're doing this like under this tree, which Hosea doesn't mention that the tree is considered to be a manifestation of this goddess. Therefore, your daughters play the whore, and your daughters in law commit adultery, and the men themselves go aside with whores and sacrifice with temple prostitutes. They love lewdness more than their glory. Um, Hosea is telling us here that um, while he is telling the Israelites, like, hey, you should come to the temple and like repent and like, put sackcloth and ashes on your face and like tell God how sorry you are to have been born. He says people keep running off into the wilderness to go under these trees and they're getting drunk and they're eating all this meat and they're having all of this sex and they're singing and dancing and they're just having a great time. So it's his job, and it's a real thankless job. Hosea was really he was just really bitter. He was incredibly angry. He was an incredibly angry guy. He was the famous prophet whom God actually commanded him to marry a prostitute as a sign that God's relationship with Israel was so dysfunctional. And then the prostitute kept cheating on him, and he was just really miserable. But he preserves this for us. So when you ask, like, what was it that made like Baal and Asherah so popular? It was that people just got together and they had a really great time. And there are like what? Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. Most people preferred it. Most of the people in ancient Israel. As a matter of fact, when I say that archaeologists dig underneath the arrival of the Israelites and they find these like statues and carvings of goddesses. But a strange thing happens when you reach the point of 1200 BC and the Israelites arrive, and then you go up through the biblical era, the statues are still there. You still find these like statues of naked women all over the place. And so the religion of Baal and Asherah, it never went away. Archaeologists never find that it declined in popularity in the biblical period. Um, the prophets and then later the temple priests, they represented a minority. Actually, they were like this small kind of fundamentalist religious minority during the history of biblical Israel. Um, the most popular religion was always Baal and Asherah. The thing is, in this case, it was this little minority of radical religious fundamentalists. They were the ones who wrote stuff down, and their texts survived and became this big religion. Um, did the Israelites believe that they were forsaking God by worshiping a goddess? Actually, um, archaeologists have found that there are traces, there are artifacts in ancient Israel in which people say that the God of Israel, and they use God's personal name, um, can give blessings alongside the goddess Asherah. Um, for example, in this ancient carving, in which you've got the Asherah tree with the goats feeding it, and that was like the major symbol of that religion. Um, Here is a cow giving milk to a calf, which again, that's a symbol of like abundance and fertility. And here you've got somebody playing an instrument while somebody else dances. And here in the front, you've got these two figures dancing together. And the caption above it says, may there be blessings in the name of the God of Israel and by Asherah, by the indigenous fertility goddess. And so um, the Bible tells us that that the God of Israel and the goddess of the Canaanites were always at odds with each other. But we have archaeological evidence, and here again is another thing that puts the name of the biblical God with the name of this indigenous goddess. Apparently, there were plenty of people who felt that the God of Israel had shown up and replaced Baal as the storm god and as the companion of this local fertility goddess. We know that when Solomon's temple was built, and here you've got a diagram of the temple, and this all looks very, very distinguished. Here we can see an example of a bullhorn altar, an altar that's got these horns on the corners. But we also know that the Bible keeps telling us that the temple, when it was built, was immediately filled with the goddesses, not only the goddess of Israel, but Solomon. Remember, the Bible tells us that he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, secondary wives, and that they turned his heart away after other gods. And that Solomon followed Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites, and that he did the same for all of his foreign wives who offered incense and sacrifice to their gods. So Solomon builds this temple, but he fills it up with all of these fertility goddesses. Solomon probably did not have 700 wives and 300 girlfriends. That's in the Book of Kings that kind of like amps it up. In the Song of Songs, it says Solomon's got 60 something wives and like 30 girlfriends. And I think that's probably closer to the truth. All right. Now, the temple it was the temple of the God of Israel, but it always had these goddess statues and these temple prostitutes. And by temple prostitute, what it means is there were people who would consecrate themselves to a god and say, I'm going to like use my like body as a gift to this god. So I'm going to use my body sexually to make money in the temple, and then that will be my offering. And this was common in ancient Babylon and Egypt and Syria. The Bible tells us it was also going on in Israel, that there were male and female temple prostitutes, and that there was also like amateur temple prostitution, and we have biblical stories about that as well. So like this, if you went back in time, or if some like really, observant like rabbi was like, I really want to go back in time and I want to see the Temple of Solomon while it stood. They might be like shocked. They'd be like, oh my goodness, there is all this stuff going on here, which is clearly described in the Bible. And we're told that this is 90 years after the death of Solomon. There was a king Asa who said, like, nope, all the prostitutes and all of the naked statues have got to come out of the temple. But then 200 years later, we're told that King Hezekiah had to say, like, nope, all the prostitutes, all the naked statues out of the temple. And then a couple of generations later, King Josiah again was like, no, all of the prostitutes, all of the naked statues out of the temple. So no matter how many times they kept removing these things, the Bible tells us that they kept coming back. That was what people always expected. And it generally says, like, and then Asa died and went to rest with his ancestors, and his son was a no good king who brought the prostitutes and naked statues back into the temple. So this popularity contest between the religion of Canaan and the religion of Israel. This was like an ongoing, constant struggle. In the time of the prophet Jeremiah, the temple finally got destroyed. It got destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. And Jeremiah, the prophet, and here he's young. He gets kind of grabbed by a bunch of people who go to hide in Egypt. They just drag him off and they say, like, we're going to wait this out. We're going to hide in Egypt. So Jeremiah is among the exiles in Egypt. And we read in the book of Jeremiah that they're in Egypt and he sees that they are baking erotic cakes in the shape of like human body parts, and that they're consecrating these cakes to these goddesses. And Jeremiah says, like, what are you people thinking? Like, the temple just got destroyed. God is clearly punishing us because of your infidelity. And now we're in Egypt of all places, and you're still like, you're baking erotic cakes. But he gets this interesting response. All of the people exiled to Egypt answered Jeremiah, as for the word you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we are not going to listen to you. Instead, we will do everything that we have vowed, make offerings to the Queen of Heaven, and pour out libations to her, just as we and our ancestors, our kings, our officials used to do in the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. We used to have plenty of food, prospered, and saw no misfortune. But from the time we stopped making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out, that's making wine offerings, we have lacked everything and have perished by the sword and famine. And the women said, indeed, we will go on making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out libations. Do you think that we made cakes for her, marked with her image, and poured out libations to her without our husbands being involved? So here, the prophet Jeremiah accidentally preserves for us this interesting snapshot in which, during the period of Israelite kings, people, including the kings, were constantly doing this. They were worshiping these goddesses. They were making erotic cakes. They were pouring wine, and they were making these wine offerings. And to the question of, like, well, maybe it was just the women who were worshiping this goddess. Then the women say, like, and also, like, there's no way that we were doing this without our husbands being involved. What was the most popular religion in Israel during the biblical period? It was this. So when we see this story about the woman and the fruit and the tree, uh, these were elements of that older religion that the Israelite prophets and priests were never able to stop people from practicing. Um, and it seems that this story with the curse upon, with this curse upon the woman, um, survives as a piece of propaganda against this more popular religion. Um, Now, I mean, unfortunately, there are people, in the world who like take this Eden story really literally, and it is still used as a tool of oppression. Although it's ironic because it represented really this little minority view. And we close out with this. In the religion of Judaism, there is the belief, definitely, that God is alone and has no partner and is unmarried and has no like female companion. However, at every Sabbath service, the Sabbath itself is personified as a female partner of God, and there is a bridal song, there's a wedding song in which every Shabbat service um, celebrates this wedding of God and the Sabbath. They sing, "Let's go, my beloved, to meet the bride, and let us welcome the presence of Shabbat. Come in peace, crown of her husband, both in happiness and in jubilation, amidst the faithful of the treasured nation. Come, O bride, come, O bride." Uh, so there is this little hint, this little surviving trace of that God of Israel, kind of still needing this female partner. Um, all right. Well, this was quite a lot. Maybe kind of an eye opener. But do we have any questions about this? Yes. Yes. Yeah. This is one of those things uh, that yeah. As far as I know, there's a great diversity in Judaism. But I think this song, the Lecha Dodi, I think that's like the most common Sabbath song. Um, All right, good, good. So uh, next session, next month when I'm here, we're gonna continue from here. We're gonna look at some more stuff in the Bible and then continue into a study of Judaism. Uh, so thank you, and I'll see you in about 4 weeks.